I'd like to call the meeting of the local planning agency Thursday, May 10th to order. It's now 9:01. And I'd like to have a roll call.
Jeff Maturo.
Here.
Carolyn Gallagher.
Here.
Rex Sims.
Here.
Sam Vincent.
Here.
Meg Jacobson.
Here.
Don Colapetro.
Here.
Linda Schwartz.
Here.
Okay, let's get started. Arthur, if you want to begin reading these things into the record.
Thank you. So the first item is an amendment to the Bonita Springs Land Development Code. In this case, it's to Chapter 2, which is actually Article 6, Division 2, Road Impact Fee, amending Section 2-191, Rules of Construction Definitions, Section 2-193, Computation of Amount, Section 2-198, Refund of Fees Paid, Section 2-201, Exemptions in Section 202, Credits, providing for conflicts of law, severability, codification, Scrivener's errors, inclusion in code, and an effective date. This ordinance is in the process. We wanted to get the ordinance into the pipeline as soon as the impact fee study, which I have also provided them today, and I'll provide the clerk. I'm going to give Mr. Colapietro a copy of it right now. Mr. Dolmer will provide it, and I'll get you one after the hearing. City Council in the month of April, on April 2nd, they looked at a impact fee, and April 16th, they did a revised, and I was directed at that point to prepare two ordinances. This is the first of those ordinances, and this is the road impact fee ordinance. As far as learning how they come and determine impact fees, the impact fees do emanate from the Growth Management Act, just as local planning agencies do. This is part of the Growth Management Act. It is also part of the comp plan in the sense that we have a capital improvement program that we have every year, and this is how we do a lion's share of the funding of the capital impact fee program for roads. Although it's not the only way, as Mr. Sims and I were talking about prior to the meeting starting, gas tax is also an available revenue for certain road projects and other funding sources when available. City Council selected the second alternative in the revised study, which is a shorter gap. Impact fees have to follow what's called the dual rational nexus test. And this means you can't just charge road impact fees based on what we think. We actually do perform a study based on localized data of what's available in the area. And it has to cover the impact of the new development to the infrastructure, whether it's new infrastructure or going. It can't be used just to fund your operation and maintenance of roads. It's a very capital project, and it's to accommodate the new growth. If you look at the study on page 6, it actually has this. It has the actual statute. Impact fees emanated from case law, but later became a statutory provision in 2006 as amended, and it has requirements, and one of the requirements is a 90-day. So if, like I said, Mr. Sims and I sometimes will talk about the city charter and my the 30-day requirement that we have in the city charter, and this actually has 90 days for any new impact fees that raise the rates go into effect. So there was a time was of the essence to do this in May, so I apologize if it came to you very quickly, because otherwise we would have to wait like a whole month based on scheduling dates. There's also, in the impact fee study, you'll find an executive table, and that has the rates. There were some modifications after these rates. One is, and I still need to get with Mr. Dolmer, as to car washes. I believe we have some changes in there that I need to make. And otherwise, I think all the other changes were done. Is this okay, this is probably an out, I apologize. You were given the April 24th version of the ordinance, and there is a revised ordinance. My apologies. Huh? The one that was attached to the background that I have here says April 24th, and I know we had a changed ordinance. The ordinances went flying at this month.
May 2nd.
Yours says May 2nd? Why does mine say? I have an old printout. Can I get a, somebody have a better pencil?
Here. Audrey.
No, I'm looking at the ordinance date in here, and this is what's going before May 16th. So, would you like me to get a printout before, I'd prefer if we get one, if I could have a short recess on ordinances, and that way I could get you.
So evidently, has enough volume of changes that we need to have a.
I don't know if it's enough volume. Let me read them out
Just a
to
sentence or
you.
two, we could probably handle it.
Yeah, probably could.
So,
There's not a significant number of changes, but there are changes.
right, and let me just grab it real quick. So the draft that's on file with the city clerk, actually mine says April 24. I'm getting more scared. Let me just check, see if I have it as a revised date one.
Well, we're really not voting on the changes.
No, you're not. Maybe so there's some multiple changes in the document, and it's an amendment to the impact fee. I did want to point out that definitions in the ordinance that are changes or definitions that come from the study. This is one of the rare circumstances. Instead of using the definitions in Chapter 9 for the most part, you use the definitions that are in the study and in the ordinance when doing calculations, because it comes from the ITE, Institute of Traffic Engineers, and they have like a separate speaking language, for lack of a better term. So there were some changes requested by council, and those changes were implemented. And that's basically it.
Does
Do you have
anyone
any
here want to
questions?
see these or have a copy of these?
So these changes are only in the calculating department?
No, in the definitions, for example, we modified in the ordinance. Okay, I see what you're saying. Yes, in the calculation in the table. There were some changes, not to the dollar amounts, but to how to do the calculation. And there was an area called car wash semi-automated. I don't know if we're gonna just treat that as retail. I haven't talked to him yet, which was what our consultant's recommendation was.
What you do have and what's reflected in the ordinance in front of you is that they have deleted the age-restricted community of 55 and over as a specific use for single-family, and that was a big deal. Our local traffic data shows that there's not really a difference in trip generation between age-restricted communities and other communities, and so we asked that that be removed. They've also made some other minor tweaks. The
Right.
car wash was the only one that I knew was still remaining.
And actually, right, and actually you do have the correct document. It just wasn't shown as highlighted, so I didn't.
Why don't we just get a copy? You can give us a copy
It actually is the
after
correct one. So,
for our record.
it is the correct one.
So
I
there-
just,
There are no
the date threw me.
changes in the definitions here of different things, like public, institutional, and stuff.
Yes.
I mean, because I have a couple of questions on those, but there have been no changes.
No,
from
that-
what you
that
have
would
to what
be-
we have.
That would be this, actually, the document you do have is the most current. The date kind of threw me because it was April 24th. It seemed like it's longer, but, what is your question on public
Well,
institution?
I wanted to go back to page 6 and 7. First of all,
Okay.
you took out the definition for shopping center. I don't have a problem with that, but you refer to shopping center, for which you have no definition now, under public institutional.
So shopping center is now found mostly in retail commercial in that definition. And that's the definition, the page 6. If you look at the definition for retail
My
slash
problem is having a
commercial.
hard time using it under the definition of public slash institutional, blah, 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 blah. And then you use not located in a shopping center, of which you say that you have crossed it out, so you don't now have a definition of shopping center.
But
I
we
know
haven't,
this should be intuitive, that people know what a shopping center is, but since everything else is explained,
No, that's
I mean, it's kind of a conundrum.
so we have a lot of definitions that say not located in a shopping center.
Yes, you do.
And we actually, that was one that Councilman Gibson brought up during the movie theater discussion, because there's actually a different trip generation with movie theaters versus regular. We do have retail commercial, which now covers shopping centers, for the most part, covers it. So there is a new definition that we don't use the term shop.
See-
You're right, but
I mean,
With
how
the
can you
cross-reference.
use, if you have no definition of shopping center, how can you use it in the definition of something else?
No, I understand your point.
Yeah, it's kind of a.
So the cross-references need to be amended so that it says retail commercial and not,
Yeah,
the
logical.
shopping center
make
is
it
used in
logical.
parentheses as an
You
informal
got it.
term.
Yeah.
right.
So-
I was actually told to delete
I had a
it.
couple of other little things like that.
Do you want me to put that back here? All right.
You
No,
want me to just go through those real fast?
Let's keep ordered here. How do you want to start this? You read this in here now. You up for questions?
Absolutely.
Okay. Yeah, if you'd like to proceed.
Okay. There was another one in here. You had combined, I think on the fee chart, RV park and mobile home or something. Let me see. Get my notes. Maybe you didn't?
Yep.
Now I'm
Page
not
9.
finding it.
Page 9. Yes.
Page 9. I'm still not it's probably under mobile home. I'm still not finding. I'm looking at 5, at the bottom where it says mobile home. And then I thought, I have a question in my margin saying RV park. So I kind of thought it needed to be there too. Where is my RV park? You're saying it's 9, I'm not finding it on 9.
So on page 6, we have definitions, like, for example, park trailer has the same meaning as chapter 4, mobile home move-on permit. We talk about recreational vehicle development order, which allows for RV placement. Then when you go into the actual code and the land use types, we talk about, there's a footnote 1. And what footnote 1 says is, hey, if you have an RV or a mobile, not an RV, if you have a mobile home and it's not located within an established mobile home park, then it's going to be treated as a single-family residence. So there used to be a time where you might get a discount in your impact fees, but the trip generation was the same. So that was not fair, and that probably was illegal, because then you shift the burden to other people than having it in a mobile home. So within a mobile home park, you would get the credit at the mobile home park rate, but you wouldn't get it in the single family if you just placed a mobile home on single family. Is that what you're looking
Well, I
towards?
think my comment was, he was right, it's on page 9, I just missed it. That's what I was looking at before, that they have them together under the same rate, and you have a definition here that's only mobile home, but it doesn't
And you also
say
have,
/ RV park. I would just stick that in there
Correct.
unless
Well-
there's a different definition for RV park.
I understand what
which,
you're saying, and
yeah.
there's actually, that under RV, it says recreational vehicle development order. And I think in that section, you could provide a definition for RV park. That would to keep it in alphabetical order. I think
Okay.
they are separate definitions, but in terms of the
Yeah.
fees, they've been treated the same.
Yeah, I can see that, but it just made me wonder, because when I saw them both together
Mhm.
and I go look for the other one, I didn't find, the RV one, I didn't find it. The other thing, okay, we did shopping center. I'm going to try to do this really fast. You need to have a, page 6, this is typo. At the end of public institutional, you start recreational vehicle. I think you just need a space, a line, a blank line.
Oh, thank
Um,
you.
It makes it stand
Right.
out better.
That's just,
Did I have
Actually,
another-
that should address your previous concern,
right,
but much someone listed as a park.
right. It just got merged into that paragraph.
Okay,
Thank you.
yeah. Okay, so that may be, multifamily,
One I can fix.
timeshare is not addressed as a definition, although it is addressed somewhere up at the top of page 9.
And
Multifamily timeshare, but I don't think I saw a definition for timeshare.
no, and we normally don't because it's a unit of ownership.
it's here.
and-
Same meaning as chapter 4, okay.
Yes, ma'am.
Mhm.
All right, so we got that. I think that's probably all of those that's all of those that I had. There was one more, top of page 5, when the added programs at the very top and underlined it, when I read that again, I seemed to think it was redundant.
I'm sorry, which section are you referencing on page
Well,
5?
it's actually bottom of page 4, beginning of page 5, but it's the word programs, it's underlined, that was a change. I think that's redundant, because you talk about,
Well, they're all
federal
in-
assistance through programs set forth, and then you name so-and-so, or another one. And then I don't think you need to add programs again at the end.
Okay.
Just read it over.
And quite frankly, I saw another government had amended the definitions to do the underlining or add it, so I added it. Whatever the grammar
But I
police
think that-
want, I don't
Right.
care.
The programs refers to section 811. So it's section 811 programs. Everything you see in between section 811 and the word programs are in parentheses referring to those specifically.
Yeah, but she's right, because it says federal
after the
assistance through
parentheses.
programs, and then you go into section 202, and you have the parentheses, you have section 210, then you have section 811.
Mhm.
So.
You have a one thing or another thing, but you have the programs
I'm taking it
set
out. I
forth,
mean, unless
blah, blah,
somebody tells me
blah.
not to, I'm taking it out.
A or B, and then you have programs again. I don't know, just read it over, see what you think. I think that's all I had on that.
And I can tell you what happened. When I draft the ordinance, I'll look at multiple sources, and I saw that this definition, which was taken from another place, somebody added it, and they probably added the redundancy, and I just added it too. So, following does not always make good things, so I appreciate it.
Well, I can see by the time they get to the end of that huge
It's a long
sentence, where you would think, well, I need to say programs again.
And it might even be easier if you use a colon after that, assistance through the following programs,
Yeah.
colon, and then take out set forth in, and then just go, and that
That
might
might
make
be
it
better.
easier.
Anyone else? Rex?
I have 3 quick questions. On one, my first one is on page 16, 15 and 16, it talks about exemptions. And it talks about when you apply for the exemption and so forth, but it doesn't really say how you do this. Explain to me how a group that was building a moderate income housing, for example, would get an exception.
I mean, what is it's basically acknowledged with a permit, because impact fees are calculated through the time of development order. And at that time, if it was going to be for a project or one of the classifications that was exempt, it would be established then. And it was simply,
Are you the person that handles that? Your
well, you don't want me
department?
to do math, but yes, it is our department.
Okay. They do not require a public hearing or something?
No.
Not if it's specifically listed. If there's a question, it could always go to council, but no, not as part of this process.
Now, we do require a green sheet when we, where's the one? Give me a second. We have an impact fee bank. So this is something the LPA reviewed probably one of the first 2 or 3 years of our incorporation. So Don may remember it, and Rex, because I remember I got screamed at for creating it. And what it was if we did condemnation and we took cars off of the road system because we acquired houses, we said, well, city's going to retain, we pay a lot of money when we do condemnation. We're going to
Yes.
retain the money, when we purchase that property and take those units off, and then we reserve the right to transfer them. And originally, it was just to affordable housing, but then we changed, city-operated affordable housing, and then we changed it to or economic development programs.
But if I came to John and with an affordable housing project, I would make the claim for exemption right then?
Well, most affordable housing projects, you would start that through the zoning process. The ones that we have now are almost all planned developments, at which time they are establishing what type of affordable housing that they want to
Okay, you're
to build.
missing me, John.
I am, but
When,
right.
how do you,
The
how
zoning-
is this done?
Right, the
Does it
zoning ordinance
require-
has a separate section. We actually
Okay.
have 2 different
for
things.
affordable housing.
Right.
So we have an affordable housing, and again, if they're providing on-site housing, usually they would be working with both the city and Lee County Human Services to make sure we would have things recorded, similar off of Matheson, that apartment complex or that condominium complex used to have affordable housing units. And they obtained density credits, and then they paid the city back because they didn't want to be in the program anymore because market value became better. And then the city changed their code at that time on that provision to make payback a little more reflective of the value of the density. And we've sat here and talked about that before. In those situations, we enter into a bonus density agreement. And if they obtain bonus density, it goes in there. Similar, if they receive, we know it's now an affordable housing project, we have the ability to do the exemption through the affordable housing project. If it's a city operated, it's easy. And the city used to have a relationship with Bonita Springs Area Housing Development Corporation before they went belly up. And so they were listed as our operation for purposes of that. We don't have a city operated, but we would enter into an agreement with an entity so that we would be able to treat it as affordable housing.
Well, over here on page 16 where it says for a city-operated affordable housing, that was our vehicle back then.
Correct.
Okay. But the point of the whole thing is, a person doesn't have to come and get a change in the comp plan or anything like that to qualify for affordable housing. It's
Yes,
an
sir.
administrative thing. I don't want to make it so complicated.
Well,
Yeah.
there's a lot more to it than just a simple yes or no answer, because there's a lot of different ways to provide affordable housing, and each one of them has their own approval path based upon a
Okay.
particular piece of
All
property.
right, that answers my question for the first one. The second one, second question I have is pertains to the chart and on the street impact fees, and I'm looking at, for example, Tony's project up on Old 41 that is in the Old 41 overlay district, and it's multi-story, first floor retail, second floor office, third and fourth floor, for example, of housing. And so I'm looking on this chart on page 9 and 10, and I'm trying to figure out what my impact fee would be for a building of multi-use.
If you look at multi-use buildings, it's kind of falls under the same as the shopping center, where it is based upon the uses as they come in. So as the building comes in with a certain number of units, they would pay for those units. And if they come in for a restaurant or retail, would be calculated for the square footage proposed for each of those uses.
Right, so if you look at the chart, you would see retail as one of the uses, or office as one of the uses.
Was that
And
each floor now?
Now, no, so you have your multifamily. So
Yes.
each multifamily, based on dwelling unit, will get a charge per dwelling unit. So we add those. You also add in your retail components or your general office components at the rate at 1,000, per square foot. So depending, you do a measurement. So if you have a floor to area ratio of 1.2, and does everybody here understand when I use the term floor to area ratio? Because I'm looking at some of the new members. I'm not sure.
Yeah, Audrey, could you explain that?
Yes, so, and it's good for anybody watching. So a floor to area ratio is used with commercial, and that says you can, because we recognize your building vertical, you have additional, let's say you have 1 acre, you can build 1.2 acres, but you're not building out, you're not going out onto your property, you're going up.
Okay.
So a floor to area ratio increases the height. So you can't look at just one layer when looking at impact fees. You're looking at the square footage throughout the whole structure.
Well, in a nutshell, then, each floor is charged an impact fee.
No, sir, the building is charged an impact fee, but if you look under note 5 on page 11, if a building permit is requested for a building with mixed uses as defined in section 2-291, then the fee will be determined according to the schedule set out in this subsection by apportioning the total space within the building according to the space devoted to each principal use. Now we get into the reference to shopping center that we will need to address, but it says a shopping center will be considered a principal use. However, when located within a shopping center, a fast food restaurant or convenience store with gas sales will be considered a principal use. So that second sentence doesn't really address your question, Mr. Sims, but the first sentence does. You pay your fees according to the uses proposed within that building.
So when somebody comes, like Tony did, he doesn't have any uses designated except in two of the buildings are going to be residential only, as I recall. But here we have worked real hard to establish on Old 41 a mixed-use project, and here
You
I'm a little
address it.
confused on what it's really going to cost.
Because the cost, just like any other project, is based upon the uses and the square footage associated with those uses. So when he turns in his development order, essentially, it's a different process downtown, but when he gets to that section of his permitting, he will identify each type of use he wants in each building and the square footage associated with that use. With that, we will apply this schedule of fees to calculate
each
his
floor,
impact fees.
to
Yes,
the
sir.
total building. Okay.
Yes, sir.
So, thank you. My third question is, this is a substantial increase in cost, and I was running over in my mind, and I think all you folks remember, the Dean Street project had, I couldn't remember exactly, but I thought it was around 256 units or so in that area. And if it, when it was before the board before, their fee would have been 2.6 million, and with this increase, it's going to be 3.6 million. We're adding $1 million to the impact fee for the Dean Street project, for example.
That might not be a very good example because in their calculation for units and impact fees, there are improvements that they have agreed to make with the city as part of their zoning that would both, in some cases, give them units and in some cases give them credit towards their impact fees.
I see.
So that
We
one is
did
not.
give them credits for their kayak launch and so forth. as
We
I
came
recall.
up with the agreement for certain improvements to be made, then certain credit would be given. If the improvements are not made, then obviously the credit would not be given.
Now, when we give bonus units like that, they're also charged an impact fee.
Yes, sir. Units are units in terms of
Okay,
impact fee
so my
calculation.
question is, and I think the board is a subject that we're not here to discuss whether this is a good thing or a bad thing to do, but in this particular case, it's adding $1 million to the impact fee. And would that be a deal breaker?
I don't know.
Well,
I say I don't know because I have not seen their construction numbers. I do not know what they intend to charge for rent. If they were to move in a direction of a condominium as opposed to apartments, would that make a difference? The ownership model, the rent versus unit cost, all of those things have
They're strictly a
impacts.
rental because they don't have
Correct.
elevators.
Correct.
So they're walk-up.
Well, that's a different standard. It's
They're
not.
essentially the closest thing to affordable housing that's in view here, because they're 1,100, as I recall, $1,100 base rent. And so I look at it and say, well, that's the closest thing to affordable housing that is happening here. And are we driving away the potential to have affordable housing by adding $1 million to their impact fee? That's
That is a very valid concern, and the opposite side of that coin is when the city is calculating the cost of infrastructure that will be needed to accommodate units as they're constructed, what is the share of that cost? Because someone will pay for that construction, whether it is out of the general
Yes.
fund, whether it is impact fees, whether it's through some other form. And if the city has to continually raise taxes to pay for those improvements, wouldn't that also relate to somebody's rent or to their mortgage? I think that there's a number of moving parts, and I think the impact fees alone is an important aspect because it's a check that has to be written up front before generally revenue is received. However, construction costs money, and someone will be paying for that construction regardless of whether it's on a tax bill or whether it's an impact fee or whether it's through their rent to accommodate the level of service that we've established that we have to provide.
And if I can just add to it, the city's experience is that when it has provided housing through affordable housing means, and that property doesn't have that tail end on it where the market is controlled, all of a sudden, something that was supposed to be, the people will buy out, and that was our experience at the complex at the end of Matheson and Terry. You know, because at that point, we were charging about $3,000 or $5,000 per unit, was the going rate, for buying additional density. And all of a sudden, we end up having the housing there, and it goes to market rate. It doesn't, people, without the restraints, they're not gonna do it, and they will always a little cynical. Many times, we have seen where people have promised that it'll be a certain rate, but once the market rate appears higher, the rates fluctuate higher, and then, of course, if the rates are too high and people can't afford it, and they don't get the market, they drop the rates.
John, let me ask, is any part of Mosaic being subsidized?
They've entered into an agreement essentially through their zoning approval to receive credits for certain improvements. So the city is not writing a check.
Federal subsidies?
No,
Not
no
that I know of.
affordable housing. It's not Section 8, it's not any of the
Can't
affordable.
qualify here and
Yeah.
And Mr. Sims, kind of, one last thought on your question. It's a very important question, but it gets into an overall financial policy of the city. I can talk to you about impact fees, but when you start getting into the larger economic picture, I'm probably not the right person for you to ask, although it's very interesting. But it comes down to, how does the city want to handle infrastructure? How does it want to distribute costs, or does it want to distribute costs? And in what
does the
form?
city have this bank of impact fees from the money that they spent on 041? Does any, how does
There
that count?
is some from Bamboo, Mobile Home Park, when we acquired Whittle property. So the park that you know is Riverside, that has the cottages. There used to be the small band shell area, but the city purchased a mobile home park, and so we had the units and the fishing cottages there. We purchased across the street Bamboo Mobile. Now, I believe we're still retaining some of those credits because we hope to put that out the city hopes that one day it'll put it out for a request for a proposal and have something, and I believe LPA spent a lot of time talking with something like a San Antonio type, where you have the shopping and you can enjoy the river as an attribute. So there are things, I don't know the exact number in the bank currently. I know we have withdrawn from the bank, as well as we've done this with BSU for A&C credits. BSU has been a good partner with the city. Because those two are a
John,
big hit.
speaking of Mosaic again, have they received their development order?
No, sir. They did receive a letter from us requesting additional information this week.
Yeah. So if they had received the development order, would this increase in fees be applicable?
These increase in fees won't be applicable unless they have to pay them 90 days after council adopts this. So anytime before that, the old fees would apply.
So it
Anytime after.
behooves them to move on to get the approval prior to this taking effect.
Financially, yes, sir.
$1 million.
Yeah, that's pretty good motivation. Interesting. Yeah.
The easy one
Talk
is.
closer to the mic.
Sure. Sorry. If you had made the statement that a person comes in, they have a plan, they want a development order, you shake hands and money passes for the road impact fees, park impact fees, whatever. What happens, so it's paid, done. What happens if they decide to now, instead of having a little boutique, they have a little restaurant or something that would change the use, more trips, whatever?
It
What
would either
happens
be,
then?
if it requires an amendment to the development order, it would be caught then. If it required simply a building permit, it would be caught at that time.
What if it's later?
Change of use?
What if
It-
they can't rent it to who they wanted to rent it to, and the only one who wants to move in is a restaurant, and it's a year or so later?
One or two things would have to happen. Either they would have to make internal or external improvements, or they would not. If they have to make those, it would be caught through a building permit. If they do not have to or they don't have to make those improvements, it would be handled through a use permit. Because when somebody comes in to file for a use, which they need our approval before they go pay their business tax with the county, we would evaluate the use, look at the impact fees, we look if taxes have been paid, we look at general improvements to the site, and impact fees are a very important part of that review.
So you would still get the impact fees
Yes, ma'am, at that time.
at
And
that time?
you would get just the incremental change.
Mhm.
You
Yeah,
wouldn't
und-
get the
yeah,
whole
sure,
amount.
sure.
You just would charge for the new cost.
And that's how we handle it for, if you look at the center across the street, the tenants there today were not the tenants there when the building was constructed. So as new tenants come in, we evaluate the use and compare that to what the impact fees have already been paid. If something is needed or if there's an incremental increase, we collect that at that time.
So if there's no change, then there are no additional
Correct.
impact fees charged to.
Correct.
Right.
If it's an office to an office, as an
And
example.
do the impact fees go to the person who owns the whole, or the charge of the impact fees go to the person who owns the whole shopping center for the changes? Or does it go to the people who move into the little shops?
We require it for the use to be permitted, whether the landlord or whether the tenant pays for those fees. We've seen both
Okay.
situations.
Right, so road impact fee credits, and that's an interesting subject matter. We issue road impact fee credits if somebody helps build something, so like Bella Logan Road is a issue I'll be working on this week. So with the credits, they have to be used during a certain amount of time or they expire. I think it's 9 years, 7 or 9 years.
Yeah, and
Um,
someplace
the-
they say 10 and 6 for something.
There's a certain date, I can't remember exactly, but we have had them expire in the past, very
I don't know if
rarely.
that's
People
credits.
usually can use them. They are generally transferable. And then the other thing is that if we increase the road impact, if we increase our impact fees, the credits move up proportionately to the increase. So if somebody has, let's say, 10,000 in impact fees, and we change a 10,000 impact fee to a 15,000, that impact fee is now worth 15,000 that they have as a credit.
Okay,
Do we have any other questions,
there.
comments? I'd like to make one comment concerning in the application for use, and I've seen this take place quite often. The community development usually heavily vets the use. In other words, when someone comes in, they say, this is a use. You don't take that as a blanket use. You investigate that to make sure that is a proper use and that they can do that. So you really can't just go in there and say, I'm using it for this and get away with that. It's usually vetted.
And with good cause. I mean, many years ago, again, Rex will remember this one, we had somebody who, they received a change of use permit for opening up a video store, back when videos, and you actually went to pick up videos, and it was called Extreme Video, and the woman didn't have anything out there at that point, so the inspector actually assumed it was going to be sports videos that were being rented. And instead it was not that type of extreme video type facility, it was adult entertainment. And so we had to deal with that issue.
My mother wouldn't let me go there.
Yes. And there were many other people who told me what their opinions were of that facility, that I just wanted to close my eyes and be blind.
I remember it well.
Okay, what do we have next?
Oh, okay, if you could just,
I-
Oh,
Can I ask-
excuse me, I'm sorry.
I gotta throw my 2 cents in here.
Sure.
I'm looking at the chart and all of the figures, and the only thing I can come up with is that we're looking to build medical office space, and we don't want any more homes. I mean, you whack in a house $3,000, and you've dropped the medical office fee down to almost a third. You went from 24,000 to 9. I don't see the house impact fee as being,
And sometimes there's some
Fair.
things here that let me go through. I believe when the traffic engineers are a different, I don't want to bash a whole group of people, but traffic
Different
engineers,
thought
it is
processes.
a pseudoscience that is going into improvement, because what they're doing is they are analyzing human behavior and how we operate traffic. And that is it's very psychological oriented. And so it's all based on a calculation on trip generation. And this is what the study shows. Do I agree or not agree with it? Some of it, to me, is very counterintuitive. But just because it's counterintuitive doesn't mean it's incorrect. But as you do build houses, that is more trips people do use their vehicles from their house.
So what we see in here is a product of what occurred in here.
Yes.
Now, this will be presented to the council again,
No, council looked at this twice.
twice?
And they had the actual scientist or the analyst who provided it, Clancy Mullen, came down here from Texas, and he went through and he explained the information. I mean, it's very accountant-oriented to me, or very mathematical, very analytical-oriented, because it's explaining how each vehicle, and there's times where council did not agree with certain approaches. There were points where staff made some modification. One was to continuing care facilities, or I'm sorry, for over 55 housing. Well, if you look at the demographics of Bonita Springs, 55 is very close to our median age. I mean, for new house, I mean, it's, so treating them differently just because by virtue of housing is over 55 versus not over 55, didn't seem like that made a lot of sense. So we actually took that out and treated 55, drivers 55 as we would treat a place that had housing for drivers 30 years old. But obviously we do provide less for continuing care facilities.
Don is a very good question, because I looked at the same thing, and another correlation here would be convenience stores that have 10 or less fuel pumps
Another thing.
to one that is 10 or more,
Right.
which shows you where the service stations are going, you know, in their growth and change. And that may be the same kind of things looked at with housing in the medical facilities.
And just so this board knows, we've tried to keep an arm's distance away from the actual dollar cost. We have talked extensively about the land use type column in terms of how we define uses, but when it comes to the calculation of that fee, I prefer it to be independent. I don't want there to be any confusion that we've tried to influence that one way or another. So I've never had a conversation with a consultant regarding the dollar value. It's always been with the uses themselves. So what we have coming in, we know how to classify and can charge the, you know,
Right.
the accurate rate.
And we looked into that, and on May 2nd, we received an email back from Clancy Mullen saying super convenience stores generate fewer trips per pump. While they pay a lower rate per pump, they would likely pay more overall than convenience stores with less than 10 pumps, or 10 or less pumps. So,
Yeah,
I mean, people see more availability, they can go in, but they, you know, there's usually more space there as opposed to maybe something that only has 2 pumps or 4 pumps, but they end up paying a bigger fee overall because it is a bigger facility. So, I'm just telling you what the consultant told us.
Yeah.
Can I just make one more comment or question? Just for consistency from page 5 to page 10. Page 5, you talk about mine or quarry. I would suggest on page 10, under mine, you put /quarry or something like that. That's it.
Okay. Here, Corey, I think it's Fred Flintstone.
Yeah, me too.
When was the last time that we had an increase or a change in our rates?
2009.
We had a reduction.
A reduction?
Well, some of the areas are reducing here, and that was the
It was
point.
80% reduction in the beginning, as I recall.
How long ago was that?
Substantial amount.
This is done at a certain length of time?
We are required to charge road impact fees based on recent and localized data. We say in the ordinance that we'll do it every 3 years. It
3
has
years.
not been 3 years. It's been, for roads, I want to say it's 2009 was the last time we did road impact fees. Now during the Great Recession, we are allowed to reduce fees. Ironically, if you reduce, you don't need to wait 90 days. You can do that immediately.
In the net summary of this, would we have gained money for the city if we had done it sooner?
You don't know because you have to follow whatever data was available at the time. And,
Yeah,
you know, when you're using the data,
data
it's going to
changes.
shift because it's tied to the
Yeah.
cost of construction. So if construction costs were not around because during the recession nobody was building, it was very difficult to be able to ascertain what the fees should be.
Okay, we'll move on to the next topic.
Okay, I have, can I have a motion that this is consistent with
sorry.
the comp plan?
Uh, Anyone
I
want to
so
make a
move.
motion?
I'll second.
Okay, first and second, take a vote.
Jeff Maturo.
Aye.
Carolyn Gallagher.
Aye.
Rick Sims.
Aye.
Sam Vincent.
Aye.
Meg Jacobson.
Yes.
Don Colapetro.
Yeah,
Linda Schwartz.
Yes.
The
it's
next is-
correct, it's just not right.
I get it. Impact fees are also a growth tool that are used to manage how fast growth occurs. And remember that when you do impact fees, whether it's roads, whether it's parks, it doesn't affect just the new community coming in. It affects the empty lots that are in the regular neighborhoods. And so all of a sudden, you'll have empty lots that won't be built upon for a while. Now, the benefit to that sometimes is the tear downs become more valuable, because if you have 60,000, when you figure BSU fees, road, parks, you know, when you count up all the different fees out there, school impact fees, all of a sudden, the houses become tear down more attractive.
Are we going to be looking at school impact fees or something at
No, we do
some
not
point in
look at
time?
them. School impact fees is controlled by Lee County,
Okay.
countywide. There's actual case law that says if you charge different places and there's a county-wide school system, it's unconstitutional.
There's an interesting thing that you just brought up. On page 16, we're under exemptions, up at the item 6, it says the United States of America, the state, or Lee County School Board, but it doesn't mention Lee County. Shouldn't Lee County be in there?
Should they be exempt from fees?
6,
Which down bottom?
or the Lee County School Board?
Under,
I remember reading
6.
that.
Under 6.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't mention Lee County, it says the school board.
It
but
says
it
county
doesn't-
school board.
Yes,
County School Board. So we could add the state, county, or,
but it,
Do we wanna
he has a good point, though. Maybe it should be wider than just school board. Because
Well,
what,
Because they're a taxing unit.
well,
so-
what about the tax office and so on?
well,
Or the Lee
under
County
six,
tax
all right,
that's
so under
over in-
Florida constitutional law, the county, Lee County is responsible for payment of the constitutional officer's expenses.
Oh.
So,
So the tax, the one
I didn't
over
realize I knew that one, did you?
on 41,
And they're
in
in
the
a shopping
shopping
center.
center.
So if the shopping center would not be charged an additional fee, because I'm sure the shopping center paid a fee at one time for commercial retail use there. But if the
So-
county set up a standalone building, we could look at that under public institutional. But now you're saying, should we just exempt it?
no, I'm not
county.
saying.
I'm just
no,
saying if you broaden it.
I am not making a statement either way. I'm just saying that if the whole state and the US and the Lee County School Board, it would seem to go that maybe anything having to do with Lee County, official Lee County,
They get to pay it.
so they get to pay it, that's fine, you know. I don't have a problem with that.
Yeah.
The other thing that's
Just a
odd
question.
in that exemption thing, there's nothing mentioned about 501c3. I don't know if there should be, but there's,
No, in fact, I'm not gonna put the word county in unless council wants it, because I'm looking at the definition of public institutional, and that is a fee, and that usually would cover your nonprofits also, because it
Okay.
talks about having fraternal lodges, and some other uses that would probably be 501c3 type uses.
So the fire department's not under that either, are they?
Fire stations would pay a fee under this ordinance. Under public institutional for new fire stations.
Mm-hmm.
they're a taxing unit, they can afford.
Mm-hmm.
I guess they can.
We pay San Carlos Estates Water Control District for some wetland that, you know, we can't even we had land as sheet to us.
And-
As sheet. So what happened is if people don't pay their tax bill and nobody wants to buy the land goes to the county because of failure to pay tax bill. And then if the land's located in municipality, the county transfers it to the city. I went to city council, I says, hey, do you want us to try to sell, basically, do you want us to sell swampland? And council said no. And we had to put the land on our city rolls. Well, when we put it on our rolls, we discovered we had to pay, I want to say $350 or so a year. in a special, per lot, for a special assessment for San Carlos Estates Water Control District. And we tried to get the district to say, you know, because it's like, we don't get a special benefit, we're not using it, it's still acting as a wetland, you know, with or without us using it. And they're like, tough, you have to pay. And all the other
Oh,
taxes
geez.
got removed, but we have to pay that tax, and we're legally obligated to do so. And I guess we could try to say, well, we won't pay the taxes and let it go as sheep, but then it comes back to us. So we're paying, the council has it in the budget to pay per lot. I think we have 4 or 5 lots there now.
Like Gary Price would always say, be careful what you wish for.
That's an adage that is well
Wow.
discussed in government.
Wow. So how much benefit do we get as a wetland?
We get a lot of exotics that we probably need to clean up.
Okay.
Ironic.
Okay, I don't want to get too political on everyone here today. So let's go to the next ordinance, which is hopefully not as political. And this is an amendment to Bonita Springs Land Development Code, Chapter 2, Article 6, Divisions 3 and 4, combining the regional and community parks into a unified parks impact fee, amending Section 2-235, definitions, Section 2-236, and position, Section 2-237, computation of amount, Section 2-239, benefit district established, Section 2-242, refund of fees paid, Section 2-244, exemptions, and Section 2-245, credits, deleting Sections 2-274 through 2-288, the former community parks impact fee provisions, providing for conflicts of law, severability, codification, Scrivener's errors, inclusion in code, and an effective date. This ordinance is one that is a long time coming. And the reason I'm saying this is when the city of Bonita Springs incorporated, we, consistent with our city charter, we took Lee County's ordinances as transitional ordinances. Lee County had it set up as regional parks and community parks and had definitions for both. And you would actually do a painful exercise to determine what is a regional use and what is a community use when you're actually a community and regional. To, you know, the interpretation generally was something like a skateboard park that is a facility that attracts people out of Bonita Springs. That money should be used for regional, and a community would be something that really just localized people are using. Of course, Bonita Springs does attract people from outside of the area, and that's something we are proud of. But of course, they don't pay the impact fees. The impact fees are only for that portion of the people in Bonita Springs who pay. So the fees were merged, which means that wonderful exercise of trying to figure out, was this a community park or a regional park issue, gets to go away. So the definition went from this very large definition to now just, hey, where is it? Park has a tract of land designated used by the public for active or passive recreation. Now that can be a trail, that can be a tract of like a baseball field, a soccer field, large meadows, something like Riverside Park, Bonita Nature Place. We have a bunch of different ones. So we're able to actually downsize our definitions by merging, as well as downsizing a lot of redundant information in the Land Development Code, which this is a nice, to me this is a nice thing. We actually have from page 11 to page 20, that's all deletions. That means we're going to have a smaller LDC, which to me is always a good thing. From a dollar standpoint, these are the fees that are right out of the impact fee study. It was out of the first study, not the revised study, because that there were no changes that were made here, and it was a merger of the 2 fees being placed into one fee. And it's a lot less complicated than roads impact fees, because parks impact fees only are on housing. Businesses don't use parks. Or business development doesn't generate use of parks. People in houses generate uses in parks. So if there's political comment as growth management, you can always make that same argument here, albeit the fees are substantially lower than fees in regular housing.
Okay. Questions?
Yeah, I have a question. I'm sorry.
Comments? No?
When
problem.
are they planning to change the comp plan words?
Change the comp plan for what?
On recreation/open space element, where they talk about regional parks and community parks? I'm assuming that if they're changing this, they're going to change that.
Don't make that assumption, because you might need that for other uses. So the beach parks are all
Okay.
regional parks. Riverside, of course, is a regional. I don't know who else.
You still
Okay.
have different types of parks, and I don't think it's coming through as part of the required amendments. I'm trying to remember if there was any discussion that was set up for the optional amendments. I don't think there was.
I don't think it's part of the air.
But it
Well, it's just a question. If you're making a change here,
Right.
would you make a change here? And if this is set up for other reasons in addition, so that's fine. It's just not clear to me. I mean, I don't need to.
We
know.
can
You
take a
guys
look
need
at the
to know.
comp plan. I know, I don't believe that was an item that was, I mean, we're talking about additional parks, and for modality and mobility, there's additional park discussions.
Yes, but there actually are different standards for parks. I mean, Audrey touched on it before. There are regional type parks. There are more community type parks. If there was a discussion on it, I think it would mainly be to clarify maybe a little bit more, not so
Okay.
much to combine those
And
types of
There
distinctions.
may be reasons that you look at the standards for regional and community again, that maybe they might be combined. I don't know.
For,
So-
for
or
the
maybe not,
delivery
I don't-
of parks, I have not heard from the city's Parks and Rec department that there's a desire to do that. It doesn't mean there couldn't be.
Okay.
But I know that in terms of the impact fees, there's always been that rub as to what can go where and why.
Mhm. Okay.
Rex?
I
Thank
have a
you.
question. The impact fees can only be used on parks for capital account or only? No maintenance?
It's not, impact fees in general cannot be used for operation and maintenance. There's other funding sources available for that. However, I'll give an example. In Bonita Nature Place, when a single-family residential was being retrofitted into becoming a commercial building, I determined that was a capital improvement, or it could be determined that's a capital improvement, because you're modifying the structure, so that's now not a repair, that's now a capital improvement.
So most of the impact fees then are going for building new parks?
It's not necessarily land. I mean, it could be used for land, but it could be used for any infrastructure or capital item in the park. So a playground equipment. Now we try to use other funding sources whenever available. Buildings or capital. Anything, usually I think it's a shelf life of 5, I know with fire, it used to be 5 years or 8 years. If the item could last for like 5 years or 7 years, it could be purchased with impact fee revenue. So here, the definition of capital improvement is land acquisition, site improvement, including landscape plantings, removal of exotic vegetation, off-site improvements associated with new or expanded parks, buildings, and equipment. Off-site may include bikeways that connect to a park facility or along a city road network that is designed and used primarily for active recreation. It does not include maintenance and operations.
I think a good example of that that's in the pipeline is Dixie Moon Cafe, which is a little park proposed for that in front. I don't see a term in here. Pocket park? I hear that quite often. That would
yeah.
be regular park, right?
There's definition of parks, and we don't have it in here, like wayside, where I grew up, we had lots of wayside parks. So when a road was built, they'd have the borrow pit and the wayside next to the borrow pit. I'm assuming that's English, but, so if you drive on roads like Highway 41 or Highway US 1, there's wayside parks that are used for a lot of recreational. Of course, now they fence in borrow pits.
This goes back to what you were
I'm not sure what a
referencing.
borrow pit is, but
It just, essentially, the idea of a pocket park, the idea of a regional park, these are all different types of parks. Generally, they involve the types of uses or the type of recreation associated with it, and also the size. Pocket park generally tends to be either almost a leftover piece of land. It could be a single-family lot. They are sometimes intentional, sometimes they are just somehow transferred in ownership to the city. and then used for maybe some benches and green space.
Mhm.
So the idea of defining a pocket park might be something we want to consider, because we do have them. We do have lots
we
that have
do.
been turned over to the city in different places. We've had smaller little green space areas. We just define them currently as a
It's a
park.
park.
Yeah, and quite frankly, it's usually when you take a look at the plats. So if you look at something like Heitman's subdivision, I want to say Heitman's was 1918. They would actually show designated parks. And then they would have in a dedication, I dedicate this to the public. And so the city would, the county, and then later on the city would inherit that park facility. And then other places, we actually purchased lots or people donated lots. Or we create parks through easement areas that are so encumbered with other easements that the only other use would be treated as a park or just mow it and hope it doesn't look like a nuisance area. So an example of that would be the soccer fields under the power lines, Marnie Fields. We were able to get FP&L to let us, received a land donation from the underlying property owner, but we also received from Florida Power and Light permission to build a facility. And there really is no other use for that type of facility. We had to make sure everything was grounded so it's safe. It comes with a lot of restrictions when creating one of those.
What will the classification be for the new bike corridors that might connect Collier and Fort Myers?
We would just look at that as a trail or a pathway. There really is not a specific definition, or most of the time there's not really a need to have that type of definition. If we start looking to provide certain restrictions or incentivize development close to the trail to take advantage of it, then I think you start looking at a definition. But the provision of that type of a park or a public facility in and of itself doesn't require.
Is that going to be taxed through Parks and Recreation?
That is a very good question. I don't know who would be charged with the maintenance. I think that at this point, I don't know if any discussions have been held on that.
'Cause
They've not been
that's a
held.
coming thing and
Yes, sir.
becomes more real every day.
And remember, some of the definitions and some of these terms, and the reason you won't see it in one of these type of ordinances may come from whatever was the common language at the time. So a borrow pit borrows the fill for the road, and that's how it received its name. We don't call things the commons down here, but if I was here in the 16th century, we might have fields that we call the commons, because that's where we would take our sheep to utilize the area if we were old British, you know, and so you might have that on a plat if you're going from something that old. Florida's a Spanish land grant, so I haven't seen anything really with relics for that. Usually it's just old plats that we might see, and the word is normally park, but sometimes you'll get a other term similar to that.
Thank you. Comments, questions? Is required a vote on that section? Okay. Any motion? Do you have a motion, please, to accept this?
I'll make a motion.
I'll second it.
Okay. Vote, please.
Carolyn Gallagher,
Yes.
Rex Sims,
Aye.
Sam Vincent,
Aye.
Meg Jacobson, Don Colapetro,
Aye.
Linda Schwartz,
Aye.
Jeff Maturo.
Yes.
Okay, let's move on to the next.
So we have another ordinance, and I have also made changes to this. So this one I know, just to read those changes to you in the record. This is an ordinance of the City of Bonita Springs, Florida, extending ordinance number 1712, the temporary moratorium related to the Bonita Beach Road Visioning Study and Quadrant Study in the Comprehensive Plan Amendment approved May 3rd, 2017, as ordinance number 1706, continuing the moratorium on the processing of any zoning or other community development applications within the Bonita Beach Road Quadrant Map or Bonita Beach Road Corridor Area Network Zone Map, providing for severability and effective date. This ordinance will go to second reading to City Council on May 16th, and I'm requesting that you review it for consistency with the comp plan. I know you're not big fans of moratoriums, and because the comp plan doesn't address moratoriums, but the comp plan does address, or will one day address, hopefully, the Bonita Beach Road Visioning Study and Quadrant Study, because City Council adopted that as ordinance 1706 on May 3rd. That ordinance has been under challenge. There are negotiations and discussions that are outside of this discussion today. But at this point, it doesn't look as though it's going to be all resolved in the next month or two. And this ordinance would automatically dissolve upon the ordinance getting passed. Section 2 was rewritten because it was kind of a choppy English, and I had too many run-on sentences. So at the request of outside counsel, I modified it, and let me read this to you at this point. So it's not going to read the same as you read it here, but it'll read close. This ordinance will extend the temporary moratorium set forth in Bonita Springs Ordinance 17-12, period. This moratorium is related to the Bonita Beach Road Visioning Study and Quadrant Study, incorporated in the Comprehensive Plan Amendment approved May 3rd, 2017 as ordinance number 17-06, period. The extension is for an additional period of time, beginning June 21, 2018, and will remain in effect through May 21st, 2019, unless extended by formal action of the City Council for the City of Bonita Springs or automatically dissolved, and everything else is the same at this point, so I don't need to continue reading the
Let me say for the record here, I was remiss in asking for public comment. There was no public in attendance, so that's why we blew through that, so to speak. Okay, any questions, comments?
I'd make a motion.
And I'll second that.
Okay, let's take a vote on this.
Rex Sims,
Aye.
Sam Vincent,
Aye.
Meg Jacobson. John Colapetro,
Aye.
Linda Schwartz.
Aye.
Jeff Ventura,
Aye.
Carolyn Gallagher.
Aye.
Thank you, folks. I'll make changes to the road impact fee ordinance and get that for the packet.
Okay.
Thank you, folks.
The next meeting is June 14th. Do we have an agreement on that?
I'm not in the country.
Okay, that's all right. Excused. Everyone else? Okay, that would be the date
So-
set, June 14th, 9 o'clock. Let's go to approval of the minutes. Do we have that?
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes. Second.
Okay. Motion and second. And
Meg Jacobson. John Colapetro,
Aye.
Linda Schwartz.
Aye.
Jeff Ventura,
Aye.
Carolyn Gallagher,
Aye.
Rex Sims.
Aye.
Chairman Vincent.
aye. Okay, it's 10:08. Meeting is adjourned.